One of the most perplexing and distressing cases in Canada's criminal history remained unresolved for nearly 50 years. Despite the dwindling hope of uncovering the truth, the victim's parents relentlessly pursued justice. Recently, however, advancements in forensic science and modern technology led to a breakthrough in this long-standing case. Sharron Prior was born in the winter of 1959 in the charming city of Montreal. Her mother, originally from Great Britain, immigrated to Canada with her family at a young age and spent her entire life there. It was in Canada that she met her future husband, George, who served in the Canadian Army. The young couple experienced an instant connection and soon married. Shortly after, they welcomed their first child, Sharron, into the world. Just days before Sharron's second birthday, her mother gave birth to twins, Doreen and Maureen. In 1962, George was reassigned to Manitoba for military service, prompting the family to relocate. Their new residence was situated in one of the city's older neighborhoods, which, despite its age, was regarded as safe and tranquil. Following the move, the couple had another child, a son named George Jr. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, familial issues began to surface, and tensions escalated to a breaking point. Consequently, in 1965, the couple opted for divorce. George continued his military duties, often away from home, while his ex-wife and their 4 children settled into an apartment in Langley. They were beneficiaries of a specialized assistance program designed for military families, residing in a tranquil and inviting environment that was well suited for raising children. The woman remained unaware that even in such serene neighborhoods, true malevolence could be concealed in human form. From a young age, Sharron exhibited remarkable kindness, compassion, and a nurturing spirit. She was always eager to assist those in need, whether they were individuals or vulnerable animals. Frequently, she rescued stray cats and dogs from the streets, particularly those that had endured human cruelty or illness. With great affection, she tended to their needs, rehabilitated them, and subsequently sought loving homes for them. Sharron had a deep affection for animals and aspired to become a veterinarian in the future. Additionally, she was enthusiastic about sports and the arts, participating in a hockey club, attending art classes, and even taking lessons in needlework. It appeared that a bright future filled with promising opportunities and achievements lay ahead of her. Her mother took immense pride in her eldest daughter, who was maturing into an independent, responsible, and remarkably sensible young woman. Sharron consistently endeavored to steer clear of negative influences and trouble. However, this vigilance did not shield her from a tragic encounter with true evil. In 1975, life for the Prior family continued as usual. 16-year-old Sharron, like many teenagers, grappled with the typical challenges of her age. She had a fondness for contemporary music and fashionable attire, which her parents did not always endorse. Moreover, she had begun a romantic relationship with a boy named John, who had harbored feelings for her since the 4th grade and had finally succeeded in winning her affection, leading the young couple to embark on their journey together. The two often spent time with friends and appeared to be an ideal couple, given their genuine emotions. The girl's parents endorsed their relationship, as Sharron's mother noted that she and her daughter rarely had significant disagreements. There was always a foundation of mutual understanding and respect between them. The girl was surrounded by positive influences, however, even they could not shield her from the devastating tragedy that would upend the entire family. March 29, 1975, commenced like any typical day. Sharron awoke and had breakfast while her mother went out to shop for Easter groceries and gifts. Upon her return, the mother brought the items inside, and her eldest daughter assisted in putting them away. This day was anticipated to be special for the entire family, as the mother's friends were scheduled to visit with their son, Stephen, along with her boyfriend. Sharron dedicated most of the day to painting Easter eggs and preparing for the holiday festivities. Stephen arrived before the other guests and engaged in play with Sharron's younger brother. After school, Sharron and Stephen planned to visit the local sports association, which offered not only sports activities but also needlework. Sharron was to collect a special jacket known as Leo, named in honor of one of the organization's founders who had succumbed to leukemia. This jacket represented membership in the association, but it was not simply given away. Children had to demonstrate their commitment, such as by selling lottery tickets. Sharron was determined to earn this jacket and successfully sold enough tickets, which filled her with eagerness and pride as she prepared to go to the association. The association was set to award her prize, but disappointment awaited the girl as there was no jacket available in her size. A saddened Sharron returned home empty-handed with Stephen. Nevertheless, she maintained her festive spirit and resolved to acquire the jacket at a later date. Upon her return, she joined her mother and her boyfriend Doug in completing the final preparations for the gathering. Once all the guests had arrived, a delightful holiday dinner ensued. Following the meal, Sharron and her mother concealed painted eggs throughout the house for the younger children to enjoy searching for later. Subsequently, Sharron requested her mother's permission to visit the local Marina Pizzeria, a popular gathering place for teenagers situated nearby. Her mother had previously permitted her to go there with friends on numerous occasions, so this instance was no different. Sharron then went to her room to prepare. At around 6:00 p.m., a neighborhood girl visited the Prior household, sitting with Sharron and chatting while she got dressed for her outing. The protagonist borrowed one of her mother's sweaters and donned her favorite suede jacket. At 6:30, the girls departed the house, but Sharron ultimately went to the pizzeria alone, as the neighbor decided against accompanying her. They bid farewell and went their separate ways, one heading home and the other to meet friends. A large group of young people had already assembled at the Marina, eagerly awaiting Sharron's arrival, but for some reason, she did not appear at the designated time. The teenagers speculated that she had simply chosen to take a leisurely stroll with her boyfriend, J.N. The festivities continued, blissfully unaware of the troubling events unfolding elsewhere. At that moment, J.N. and a few friends were at home watching a hockey match. Once the game concluded, the boys made their way to the pizzeria, anticipating that Sharron would be there. However, she did not arrive. J.N. was taken aback, as he had not seen his girlfriend since school and was uncertain of her whereabouts. Like the others, he assumed that after the match, he would certainly find Sharron at Marina. Her absence raised concerns among those present, as it was entirely uncharacteristic of the usually punctual and responsible young woman. Meanwhile, Sharron's mother had put the younger children to bed and settled down in front of the television. As the evening progressed, she grew increasingly anxious about her daughter's failure to return home, especially since she was expected long ago. Nevertheless, she chose not to panic, reasoning that Sharron might have simply lost track of time while enjoying the company of friends or her boyfriend. The mother remained in the living room, hoping to catch sight of Sharron when she finally arrived. As the hours slipped by, the mother's worry intensified, and by midnight she could no longer suppress her fear, given that there was still no word from her daughter. It felt inappropriate to contact her friends at such a late hour, so she resolved to wait until morning, frequently glancing out the window in anticipation of seeing Sharron at dawn. The increasingly alarmed mother began reaching out to her daughter's acquaintances, hoping to uncover any information about her whereabouts, but neither her friends nor her boyfriend, John, had any knowledge of her situation. The evening confirmed the worst fears of the mother regarding her daughter's whereabouts. Sharron had not arrived at the pizzeria, and the neighbor girl, who had left the house with her, stated that they had parted ways on the street, and she had not seen Sharron since. A conversation with Mary, Sharron's closest friend, further intensified the mother's anxiety. She learned that after 7:00 p.m., an attack had taken place near the pizzeria involving a 23-year-old woman named Sharron Roy. An unknown assailant had lunged at her with a knife, but fortunately, passers-by heard the victim's screams and frightened the attacker away, who fled in the direction from which Sharron was expected to arrive. Witnesses described the assailant as a tall man with dark hair, blue eyes, and a mustache, who spoke in a calm, quiet voice and was dressed in a ski jacket, blue jeans, and pointed shoes. Upon hearing these details, panic gripped Sharron's mother as she realized that the time and location of the attack aligned precisely with her daughter's usual route. The woman promptly went to the police, however, the detectives were cautious and refrained from making hasty accusations. Instead, they initiated a comprehensive search operation without delay. Hundreds of concerned citizens, upon learning of the girl's disappearance, joined the effort, armed with a photo and description of the 16-year-old schoolgirl, scouring every area in hopes of finding her. The mother also appeared on local television to raise awareness within the community. A mother, desperate for information regarding her missing daughter, implored anyone who might have knowledge of the situation to contact the police and assist in the search. Unfortunately, the efforts to locate her daughter yielded no results. Days passed without any leads on Sharron's location, yet the mother clung to the hope that her daughter would return home safely. The police endeavored to maintain her optimism, even as they recognized that the critical 48-hour window for finding the teenager alive was rapidly closing. Sharron had no apparent reason to leave home. There were no disputes with her parents or issues at school. Her boyfriend, J.N., was a respectable young man, and their relationship was characterized by love and mutual understanding, making it implausible that he could have harmed her. Furthermore, Sharron was known to avoid negative influences, which left the police without any suspects or leads at the outset of the investigation. Efforts to track down a knife-wielding man reported in the vicinity also proved unproductive. As the silence stretched on, it took a toll on the mother, who continued to hope for a miracle. On the morning of April 1 ST, around 6:00 a.m., she awoke and peered out the window, where she observed something that raised her suspicions. A young man exited the home of Sharron's friend, crossed the street, and picked up a newspaper left on their doorstep. Overcome by a sense of foreboding, the mother called out to him, seeking to understand why he was up so early and taking someone else's newspaper. Instead of responding, he quickened his pace, prompting her to rush outside in pursuit. The young man attempted to retain possession of the newspaper, but the distraught mother forcibly took it from him. He shouted, pleading with her not to look, but it was too late. The front page displayed a photograph of a girl's body discovered in the snow, just a short drive from their suburban home. The woman was not only devastated by the horrific news but also by the realization that the police had failed to inform her, despite their obligation to do so. She learned of the tragedy much later than her neighbors, who had already seen the morning edition. In a desperate attempt to cope, the mother tried to convince herself that the deceased was not Sharron, but merely a schoolgirl who bore a resemblance to her. Eventually, she managed to compose herself and contacted the police to clarify her chilling fears. The detectives informed her that they were not yet certain of the victim's identity, and requested that she come in for identification. Overwhelmed with horror, she could not bring herself to do so and instead asked her ex-husband to go on her behalf. The entire neighborhood was in a state of shock, as the girl in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to the missing Sharron. Furthermore, her clothing matched the description the mother had provided to the authorities. The father immediately recognized his daughter among the deceased, confirming the tragic reality that the 16-year-old schoolgirl was indeed dead. Her body had been discovered by a local resident who had learned of the girl's disappearance through the newspapers. Upon seeing the corpse, he instantly recognized it as Sharron's and promptly reported the grim discovery, noting that someone had trespassed on his property. He had always ensured that all doors were locked, but on that Tuesday, circumstances had changed. He observed that the lock was damaged, yet there were no indications of a break-in, suggesting that the assailant may have used a key of their own, despite the fact that only the homeowner had unrestricted access to the residence. Upon exiting to the driveway, the man discovered a woman's body, unclothed from the waist down. Simultaneously, he noted that nothing appeared to be missing from the house, leaving Jack perplexed as to why someone would abandon the corpse on his property. The police soon arrived and initiated a murder investigation. Law enforcement officials quickly recognized the brutality of the crime, as the body exhibited numerous signs of violence, including bruises and hemorrhages. The victim was clad only in a suede jacket and a blue sweater, with her jeans located a few meters away and her underwear caught in a nearby tree. Her mouth was taped shut with a heavily chewed tape entangled in her hair, and she was found clutching it in her hand, indicating a desperate attempt to escape. Traces in the snow suggested that Sharron had tried to rise, implying that her assailant had left her to perish while she was still alive. The tortured schoolgirl lacked the strength to save herself. Additionally, law enforcement discovered further physical evidence at the scene. Approximately 50 feet from the deceased, tire tracks were visible on the ground, and a faint trail of blood droplets led from that location to the body. Given the absence of signs indicating dragging, detectives speculated that multiple individuals may have been involved in the murder. Notably, no dirt was found on Sharron, her socks, or her shoes. The victim had likely not crawled away on her own. She was probably removed from a vehicle and abandoned in the cold. Nearby, a man's shirt was found, and the victim's wrist showed signs of having been restrained, suggesting that she had been bound with this very shirt. This discovery contributed to the profile of the primary suspect in this heinous act, who was notably tall. Additionally, a clear shoe print was located near the gate post, along with a receipt for a Leo jacket that the unfortunate girl never had the opportunity to receive. Forensic analysis indicated that Sharron's death occurred just hours prior to the discovery of her body. It was evident that she had been held captive from Saturday until Tuesday, enduring severe abuse and rape. Marks consistent with strangulation were present on her neck, and she had choked on her own blood. Forensic experts also noted that her ribs appeared to be crushed, suggesting that her assailant had been kneeling on her chest. Furthermore, the girl had sustained a significant head injury and internal bleeding. Her body bore numerous stab wounds, and her jaw was fractured on both sides. The nose was also broken, and her cheek was lacerated by a tooth that had been knocked out. Hundreds of townspeople gathered at the local Presbyterian church to pay their respects to Sharron. Her mother, overwhelmed by grief, could barely stand, consumed by the desire for the perpetrator to be apprehended and brought to justice swiftly. Just 3 blocks away from the site of Sharron's horrific murder, Canada had already experienced a similar crime. On July 9, 1974, a tragic incident occurred involving 12-year-old Norma O'Brien, who was brutally murdered that evening. She had left her home with the intention of playing water polo at the local pool. However, upon her arrival, she discovered that the facility was closed for repairs. Norma then turned around to head home but never reached her destination. That same evening, her parents reported her missing, firmly dismissing any notion that she had run away, prompting an immediate search. The following day, the mutilated and partially clothed body of the schoolgirl was discovered in a field near the pool. There were alarming similarities between the murders of Norma and another victim, Sharron. Both girls were found partially undressed, had been violently beaten, and were strangled. Additionally, the locations of the attacks were within a 30-minute drive of one another, leading investigators to suspect that the same perpetrator might be responsible for both crimes. However, they had no leads to pursue. Following the murder of Sharron on June 23, 1975, another girl, 14-year-old Debbie Pfizer, went missing. She had been riding home on her red bicycle but failed to arrive. The next day, her naked body was discovered in the woods. Unlike the previous victims, Debbie had not been sexually assaulted. Her cause of death was determined to be a blow to the head with a rock. Soon after, a 17-year-old boy was arrested for the crime and confessed. Due to his status as a minor, his identity and photograph were not released. The assailant recounted that on the day of the incident, around 6:30 p.m., he was riding home from work on his moped when he noticed Debbie cycling with a bottle of milk in her hand, prompting him to scrutinize her closely. A sinister scheme began to form in his mind after he exchanged greetings with her, to which she reciprocated. The young man then overtook her, crashing his moped into the bushes. He subsequently sat on the curb, feigning tears. Observing this, Debbie halted her progress, and the young man beckoned her to approach, which she did. In that instant, the rogue seized the girl and began to assault her, snatching the bottle from her grasp and throwing it into the field. With great force, he struck Debbie on the head with a rock, causing her to lose consciousness. After concealing her bicycle in the bushes, the assailant attempted to rape the victim but was unsuccessful. Frustrated by his failure, he struck her again with the rock, resulting in fatal injuries. The perpetrator concealed her lifeless body in an abandoned vehicle in the woods before fleeing on his moped. Later, the murderer of Debbie Fisher confessed to the earlier killing of Norma O'Brien, yet he maintained his innocence regarding the death of Sharron Prior, as he had a verified alibi at the time of her demise, which excluded him as a suspect. He was convicted solely for the murders of the two other girls. However, due to his status as a minor, the sentence was relatively lenient, resulting in a few years of incarceration. Now, the former juvenile offender resides and works in Montreal, near the location where Sharron Prior's body was discovered. The police had gathered substantial evidence that should have led them to the perpetrator, and detectives were optimistic about resolving the case within days. However, the reality was starkly different, as 13 months elapsed without any progress in the investigation. A primary suspect emerged against whom formal charges could potentially be filed. Law enforcement officials interviewed 38 individuals who had interacted with the girl on that tragic evening. 6 of these individuals were detained as they matched the descriptions provided. Among them was Frank Daly, the manager of the pizzeria where Sharron intended to spend time. Ultimately, however, all were released due to insufficient evidence. The victim's close friends were also scrutinized. Some were at the pizzeria while others were watching a sports match at home. As the investigation progressed, it reached an impasse, with no new information surfacing and all leads proving to be false. It appeared that the inquiry had completely stalled, and everyone, except for the mother of the murdered girl, had lost hope. The mother struggled to accept her loss and continued her quest for any details that might illuminate the circumstances surrounding her daughter's death. She believed that on that evening, Sharron could not have wandered far from home. Around the same time that the girl was heading to the pizzeria, a neighbor was returning from work, having followed the same route for years. On that fateful day, however, the man asserted that he did not see the girl on the path. Given that Sharron did not reach Marina, it was likely that she was intercepted almost immediately after parting ways with her friend. The perpetrator had a very limited time frame, yet he managed to exploit it perfectly to abduct the schoolgirl without being detected. The investigators were unable to locate any witnesses to the attack, leading them to believe it was executed with remarkable precision, akin to a perfect crime. The grief-stricken mother felt compelled to scrutinize all the residents on their street, convinced that one of them might have observed a suspicious individual, or recognized the attacker if he resided nearby. The detectives theorized that the perpetrator was likely a young man, possibly still living with his parents, exhibiting certain psychological abnormalities or deviant fantasies that fueled his rage and animosity towards women. They suspected that this incident was not his first, and if he was not apprehended soon, it could certainly not be his last. Furthermore, the investigators were convinced that multiple individuals were involved in the abduction and assault of the unfortunate Sharron. They also considered the possibility that the elusive knife-wielding assailant who had attacked another girl named Cheryl around the same time might be connected to this crime. During that earlier incident, he had been interrupted by passers-by, forcing him to flee. Witnesses had provided descriptions, yet despite extensive police efforts, he remained at large. The likelihood of 2 separate kidnappers operating simultaneously in one of the city's quieter neighborhoods was exceedingly low, leading detectives to conclude that the assaults on Cheryl and the murder of Sharron were likely perpetrated by the same individual. The criminal's behavior suggested he was familiar with the area, managing to navigate it without detection and leaving no evidence behind. The investigators, while maintaining discretion among local residents, concurred with the victim's mother that the perpetrator likely resided in close proximity. His behavior was characterized as sadistic. Individuals with such inclinations typically follow a distinct pattern. Initially, they present themselves as charming and amiable, seeking to ensnare unsuspecting victims. Once they have lured their targets, these sadists become progressively more cruel and demanding. The process begins with exerting control, followed by humiliation and outright abuse. This pattern often defines their relationships with women. However, even this level of manipulation eventually proves insufficient for the deviant, who transforms into a predator actively seeking new victims. In light of this, the police deemed it essential to thoroughly investigate all local residents with prior convictions for harassment and domestic violence. Primarily, the investigators aimed to locate the elusive knife-wielding assailant who had attacked Cheryl, as he matched the profile of the killer. His communication skills were notably poor, as he preferred to express himself through violence rather than dialogue. His lack of success in life and limited intelligence were evident, leaving a distinct mark on Sharon's mutilated body. The severity of the assaults indicated that he was accustomed to achieving his desires through brute force rather than persuasion or cunning. It was clear that the maniac struggled to control his anger, often erupting into violence. The most chilling realization was that the police were likely. The situation involved a serial killer who needed to be apprehended urgently, as the murderer was consistently outpacing law enforcement efforts. Despite the dedication of the officers to locate him, they were hindered by the absence of many modern investigative technologies that are now commonplace, such as DNA analysis, surveillance cameras, and geolocation tracking. Consequently, the detectives found themselves constrained in their actions, leading to a slow and ineffective response, which the killer exploited to commit further crimes. 6 years after the discovery of Sharon's gruesomely mutilated body, a 12-year-old girl named Tammy Leakey fell victim to the same sadistic individual. It is plausible that the perpetrator had shifted his focus to vulnerable young girls, emboldened by his previous evasion of justice following the murder of 16-year-old Sharron. The examination of Tammy's remains was conducted by the same forensic experts who had previously analyzed the first victim, and they quickly identified striking similarities in the killer's methods, reinforcing the theory of a serial offender. On March 20, 1981, Tammy Leakey was visiting her grandmother when she vanished, much like the earlier victim. The elderly woman, feeling unwell, had asked Tammy to run an errand to the store, but the girl never returned. The only clue found along her route was her pair of glasses, discovered on the sidewalk by her mother as she returned home. Alarmed, the mother promptly reported her daughter's disappearance to the authorities. A witness was soon located by the police, who reported seeing a man in a beige raincoat exit a small red car and forcibly push a screaming girl into the vehicle. That same evening, a barely conscious Tammy was discovered lying in the open. A man contacted the police station to report this horrific discovery. The unfortunate girl was found on the ground, naked and only covered by her own clothing. Medical personnel fought valiantly to save the child's life, but her injuries were deemed incompatible with survival. The girl had been strangled, and although there were no indications of sexual assault on her body, traces of male semen were discovered on her belongings. As in the previous incident, the assailant had acted with remarkable carelessness, leaving behind a significant amount of evidence, yet none of it advanced the investigation towards resolving these dreadful crimes. Despite the detectives' relentless efforts, the inquiry reached an impasse. During this period, similar assaults on young girls were reported in neighboring regions of Canada. Notably, in 1978, the body of 17-year-old Lisa Blah was found in Montreal, just a short distance from her home. She had been returning from a disco club early in the morning when she was struck violently on the head, raped, and murdered. The perpetrators of this crime were never apprehended. The sheer number of similar cases left the police in a state of confusion regarding potential connections among them. In 2000, Sharon's mother approached the police once more, urging them to reanalyze all the evidence related to her daughter's case. Over the quarter-century that had elapsed, advancements in science and technology had significantly progressed. Forensic scientists had access to new, more effective, and precise methods, particularly in DNA analysis. However, the response that the grief-stricken mother received by mail a week later deeply affected her. It was revealed that most of the physical evidence collected in the year of Sharon's death had mysteriously vanished back in 1995. Among the few items that remained were only the clothing of the girl and that of the alleged suspect. Forensic experts meticulously examined the man's shirt found at the crime scene and successfully isolated a DNA sample that did not belong to the victim. Despite cross-referencing this sample with the genetic profile database, no match was found. The biological material was preserved for future comparison with samples from potential suspects. This evidence later became crucial in solving the chilling case. In June 2004, police received a tip regarding a garage where the killer might have held Sharron captive. Detectives promptly investigated the site, but despite an exhaustive search, they found no physical evidence linking the location to the crime. Law enforcement officers collected 3 DNA samples, but none matched the genetic material of the deceased schoolgirl or the biological traces found on her clothing. Ultimately, this lead was considered promising. The next unexpected development in this high-profile case occurred in 2012 when an anonymous benefactor publicly offered a substantial monetary reward of $10,000 for any information that could assist in the investigation. Efforts were made to locate the ruthless murderer responsible for the deaths of 2 young girls, indicating that the investigation had progressed and that law enforcement had acquired new information. To facilitate communication with concerned citizens wishing to share their insights and theories, a dedicated telephone hotline was established. Despite the ongoing investigation, which had seen numerous attempts previously, no significant breakthroughs were realized. Investigators revisited the unresolved case involving the attack on Cheryl, aiming to finally identify the assailant. The young girl, who had successfully frightened off the knife-wielding attacker and had a clear view of his face, consented to participate in a hypnosis session. During this session, she was presented with photographs of various men, including the notorious serial killer William Patrick. The witness identified him as having a striking resemblance to the attacker. Patrick, a Canadian criminal, was later convicted for the murders of 5 women in Montreal, although he claimed to have had at least 9 victims, with the remaining bodies unaccounted for. Detectives had long suspected Patrick's involvement in the murders of young girls and had made extensive efforts to establish a link between him and these horrific crimes. However, the seasoned murderer consistently denied any wrongdoing, asserting that he had not taken a life prior to 1979, despite the fact that Sharron was brutally murdered in 1975. Consequently, the charges against Patrick in this particular case remained unsubstantiated. Law enforcement officials later attempted to connect the deaths of the schoolgirls to other dangerous criminals in Canada, with suspicion directed towards Mike French, a member of the infamous Montreal motorcycle club known as the Satans. In 1975, when the brutal murder of Sharron occurred, Mike resided in the same vicinity. 2 years later, he relocated to another city with his parents. Acquaintances of French described him as an exceedingly aggressive and ruthless individual, capable of committing acts of violence against children. There were even multiple witnesses who reportedly heard Mike bragging about his role in Sharron's horrific murder. However, fate was unkind to the investigators. In November 1982, during a violent confrontation between rival gangs, French was shot dead, taking with him any secrets regarding his potential involvement in the girls' deaths. Notably, the police were also unable to resolve the circumstances surrounding his own murder. Nevertheless, these theories remained mere conjectures, lacking substantial evidence for validation. The grieving Prior family expressed profound disappointment in the investigators' lack of professionalism, as they failed to identify the true perpetrator. The relatives of the deceased girl vowed to pursue justice for the individual who had harmed their child until their last breath. Sharron's mother regarded this arduous struggle not only as a matter of honor for her family, but also as a moral duty to all parents whose children had fallen victim to predators. In 2019, the heartbroken woman participated in the production of a television program alongside 9 others. Families affected by similar tragedies publicly criticized law enforcement for their perceived incompetence and negligence. Representatives from the police declined to attend the studio during the interview. A significant breakthrough in this high-profile case did not materialize until June 2022, when advancements in genetic genealogy enabled experts to identify a DNA profile in the database that corresponded with a sample collected from the shirt of the man at the scene of Sharron's murder. The most probable source of this genetic material was identified as Franklin Romine, who had died under suspicious circumstances in 1982. His remains were exhumed to conduct the necessary analyses. On May 23, 2023, the link between the biological evidence found at the crime scene and the DNA of the deceased Franklin was officially established. Romine's appearance closely matched the descriptions of the suspect provided by witnesses, and he resided in the vicinity where the abduction occurred. Additionally, his vehicle corresponded with the tire tracks discovered near Sharron's body. Franklin had a troubling criminal history, having previously been convicted of assault and rape. These revelations ultimately allowed investigators to piece together this disturbing narrative. While there was no one to prosecute, the investigators were able to officially close the case and inform the victim's family of the identity of the perpetrator. The murder of the 16-year-old schoolgirl was resolved through modern DNA analysis techniques and the relentless pursuit of truth by her loved ones, who had sought justice for nearly 50 years. This concludes today's episode. I encourage you to share your thoughts on this remarkable story in the comments. Thank you for your attention, take care, and we look forward to seeing you next time on our channel.